talking about how we work with each other in organizations and the need to pull together by asking better questions. I know that a lot of the conversation centers on how do we listen, and I have some strong opinions on that, which I will get to. But what I would like to suggest to you is that our approach to communicating within an organization has been classified as a push orientation. And actually, they've done research on that, and they found that 76% of us push when we talk to others. Only 22% actually pull together. And that means that we're going to create a partnership rather than an adversarial we-they relationship. And then actually only 2% do a combination. So this idea of pushing has an interesting premise. And the premise is I can push because I have all the information. I know this topic so well. I know what's going to happen. I know why it's necessary. I know how to get it done, and I know the results. So I'm in charge. And so I don't really have to elicit much information from someone else. I can just have a conversation, but it's not really in any sense of partnership. It may be an engagement. You could say that we're talking. So technically we're engaging, but engagement is not necessarily a partnership. There is another problem with push communication and the assumption that I have all the information. First of all, no one can have all the information. Things are changing too fast. There are too many specializations. Even if I know one area, I can't know them all. But there is another piece of research that I'd like to share with you, and that is that 85% of all decisions are made without considering an alternative. So if we're going to have a decision, we'll discuss the pros and cons, and we can argue it and we can debate it, but we don't really spend enough time actually looking for new alternatives. And so what I would like to suggest is that one of the ways to pull together is to change the way we ask questions and not obviously push, because the push approach to communication typically creates fear. It creates a sense of what's the right answer? Do I have it? It basically means we're going to, again, censor information in response to a question that's being pushed at me. So again, I'm going to just talk about questioning and the way that that can really create partnerships. There are two kinds of push communication. The one that is on television the most, some of us have heard of shows called Law and Order and other kinds of criminal shows. It's the interrogation question, where basically I'm going to ask you a series of questions. Where were you? How long did you stay there? What time did you leave? Who did you see? They're basically close-ended questions at a rat-a-tat-tat kind of pacing, which makes, again, a person feel defensive. Now, you can say that they get facts, but actually that's really an assumption, because the interrogation push questions frequently do not reveal the truth. What we really need to do is make sure that information is not being shaded or presented in a hazy way back to us. As a consultant, I worked in one organization, and the people at the bottom suggested that by the time the bad news got in, and they called it the muck, when the muck comes into the organization, every organization just shades it a little bit. So by the time it gets to the top, their phrase was, it will be clean enough to drink, which means that we're not getting the information in a timely way, and we end up in more crises. We're not doing the prevention issues that we could. So this kind of push communication where I'm in charge, I'll just maybe confirm a fact with you, but I'm not really asking for your input on the broad topics. It's just, I want your input on a very small, narrow topic. There's a second type of push question that basically asks a question with the word you in it. Now, you may think that makes it very personal, that this means that someone is actually interested in your thoughts. But if you ask questions like, what are you doing now? What do you think of the new plan? What are you responsible for? What are you going to be doing next? It doesn't come across as a true desire to hear all thoughts. It really makes the person who's responding to that question feel a little intimidated, feel like they may be being blamed for something. It actually, you could see it when the question's asked. There's a momentary hesitation before the respondent answers because they're thinking of, okay, what's the right answer here? I don't want to be seen as wrong or incapable of doing my job, so I got to find the right answer. It is a you versus me approach, and the respondent is basically trying to protect themselves, as basically most of us would like to protect ourselves. So the mind, is going to give constrained information. They again will shade the truth or answer in very hazy responses that really are not giving the full exchange that could be offered. An example of this is the staff meeting. And maybe your staff meetings are different than mine, but most of the staff meetings I've had is that one person who has a title or some sense of recognized superiority asks a question of a direct report, and they have a two-way conversation that ends. You ask, what's new? What's going on? Any problems, to the second person? And again, it's a two-way conversation. When it's over, you move to a third person. And then you go around until everyone has, are you ready for this word, reported. But what's interesting is that the reports are quite narrow. And when someone gets to the hall is when you hear the actual real cross communication. Because of the questions are narrow, you get a narrow response. There's another aspect that gets communicated, and that is when I ask narrow questions of you, I basically am suggesting that I don't have as much respect for you. I don't have a sense that you really can contribute significantly to this issue. So what I would like to suggest is that we shift and think about, instead of pushing, that we actually look at pulling. And by pulling, I'm talking about approaching somebody without judgment, without any doubt of their contribution as being valuable. It means that we're going to work together. It's a partnership, not a hierarchical arrangement, but a partnership. And after decades of being a consultant, I can tell you I can go into almost any organization and ask the question, what floor are they on? I don't even have to identify who they is. And I always get an answer, 15th, 7th, whatever the number is. There is a sense within organizations that we really are not working together. And it's not just in the union management sense. Even in organizations that aren't unionized, we have the sense that other people don't have our best interests at heart. They are not making decisions that will match the goals of the other people in the organization, that there's a misalignment within the organization. So I'm going to suggest that I have been able, when a client asks me to come into an organization, I can talk to their workforce and tell them, I'd like to, get some information. It's just for a report. It's not for attribution. I would just like to pull from your experience. And I get a wonderful list of things that the organization could be doing that they're not doing, some wonderful creative ideas. And what's really interesting to me is that within the organization, they could have pulled that information at any time. But our assumption about communication, being push oriented, being more we, they, or I'm in charge and they can't have a significant contribution, shades up the kind of a culture and actually limits, in my mind, the level of creativity, innovation, and cross-functional optimization that can exist within an organization. So how we change the questions, we have to make sure that we don't include the word you in our question. The minute you say, Mary, what are you working on? I think, well, I know what I'm working on, but is that what they think I'm working on? And we go through all these mental exercises to give the right example. So when you're asking questions, do try to become more aware of whether you're asking it in a non-personal, more generic point of view. So some questions that you could ask would be, instead of, do you support the plan? You could ask, how can we make the plan more effective? Again, that general kind of phrasing lets somebody make a contribution without having to own it. They could have heard about it within the some of their teammates or other kinds of sources. But there are other questions that we can make more general, and we can create a sense of respect and trust, as well as uncover more of the information that we need to make sure that we maximize our opportunity to make contributions, to also to survive. There was some research that suggested that organizations in the 1950s had a 61-year lifespan. And now the maximum lifespan is more like 15 years. And the reason is, I think, because we're not having the full discussion. We're going off on tangents without looking at what are our alternatives. So other questions that could bring out information that would be helpful would be, what potential issues could surface or might surface. Again, you're asking for someone's thoughts. You're asking for them to be creative and they're responsive. You're showing respect for their input. What are the unanticipated ramifications that we may be facing in the future? Again, very open-ended in terms of not being able to answer in one or two words, which of course is where the interrogation is very closed-ended. But this is something that actually stirs a lot of ownership and a lot of commitment to finding information and thinking about alternatives that I think we're really missing in organizations. So if we ask poll questions, what we're showing is our willingness to accept that we do not have 100% of the information. We're missing something. We have blind spots. I took a walk in the park and stopped at a water fountain, and somebody walked by me and said, I didn't know there was a water fountain there. Well, even when we're walking, we frequently will miss things. So I'm going to ask you just to do a short activity. I'm wondering if you would be willing to raise your hand and point to a distant object with both eyes open. And just keep your finger pointed to that distant object. Then close your right eye and see where you're pointing. And then open your right eye, close your left eye, and see where you're pointing. It's jumped. it's not in the same place. What we do in our minds without even knowing about it is we start combining things. We're not aware of all the alternatives that we could be exposed to. So again, if I'm willing to say I don't know everything and I don't have all the perspectives, I am much more willing to be asking questions that will pull responses, pull creative thinking, pull a desire for them to continue to explore to make sure that their assumptions are correct. We really have to make some changes. Polling questions also assume I'm willing to suspend my judgment and listen to other points of view. And when I get those points of view, I am willing to change my thinking. I am not going to ignore information that can help me. So what I would like to suggest to you is to consider questioning. What's interesting in our lives is that we've been taught by our school systems, how to speak, how to debate, all those kinds of options, but we aren't really told how to question. And even the work on, the word is active listening. I'm sure some of you have heard about it, but what it's described as is you listen intently and then you paraphrase back to somebody what they just said. And while that makes me feel good that you heard me, it isn't really opening up my desire to add more information. It isn't encouraging me to become your partner. We're just exchanging points of view, and I have no idea what's going to happen to my contribution, whether it will be ignored, whether it will be judged. So I really know that questioning is not anywhere near the top of most people's awareness when they talk about pulling people together. But there is a remarkable advantage in the sense that we can do something immediately, and it can spread, and it can build, and it can change a culture of an organization that can then contribute to other organizations being more effective, aware, attuned, and caring about the things that they either don't know or basically a willingness to engage people that hasn't been dominant in the organizations that I have experienced. Yes, there are some, but it is not the dominant practice within organizations. So I'm going to suggest that we think about pulling questions, and it sounds like it's easy, but I'll tell you, I slip back more often than I'd like to admit. But if we can do that, I think we can do something immediately to bring organizations together and to produce better results. So I'd like to offer that. It's just not as grand as changing our global practices, but if we can start where we are, it's up to us and we can make it happen. Thank you very much.